Welcome to the No Rain, No Rainbows podcast. This is a show about pushing through obstacles and hard times in order to live a happy and fulfilled life. I'm your host, Ted Phaeton, and it's a pleasure to have you joining us. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Let's grow. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the No Rain, No Rainbows podcast. It's a pleasure to have you, and as always, thank you to my executive producer, Andre Suttles, helping to make this podcast possible with Subtle Solution Media. I'm excited for today's episode. We are sitting down with Scott Anderson, CEO and founder of Double Dare Executive Coaching and Consulting, and joining us out of, was it Omaha, Nebraska, you said?
Omaha, Nebraska today, yeah.
And getting a bit of a blizzard
We're having a
right
blizzard
now.
today, yeah, that's right.
Well, I hope you're nice and warm, Scott. And I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to our listeners so they can kind of get to know you really quick before we hop into some questions.
Sure. Yeah, well, thank you. And thanks for having me on the show. I've listened to a couple of your episodes and really like the no rain, no rainbows concept. Yeah, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been starting businesses going back to our warm up of starting a shoe shine business when I was probably 6 or something. Until the current date, I've started and run a total of 9 companies and have sold most of them and still hold on. There are 2 non-for-profits that I'm still involved in and 2 for-profit businesses that I'm still involved in. Started an e-commerce business with my son actually about 90 days ago. That's really exciting. But anyway, I've always been an entrepreneur and I've always worked with entrepreneurs. And so Double Dare is an executive coaching and consulting business that helps entrepreneurs because I've been one over and over and over to hopefully learn from my mistakes and from a few successes and to move faster and farther than they might have done on their own.
Yeah. And as a serial entrepreneur, I'm sure you've seen the playing field multiple times. Really quick for some of our listeners, I know a lot of our listeners, they're ambitious, they have ideas, they might be working on a side hustle, working on a company or business of their own. What would you say is kind of the secret sauce, that secret sauce that can really kind of make someone take their side hustle or their business, change it from a hobby to an actual livable entity or something to be sold?
Yeah, I think, obviously it's the feedback that you get from customers, from clients, and that tell you you've got something. There's no more sincere form of praise than people giving you their money. But the key that I found, and the thing I really preach to people who are thinking about it, is to find a great problem to solve. One of the mistakes that I've made and I've seen entrepreneurs make is that they have these sort of passion projects where it's sort of myopic. It comes from their point of view, what they want to do. And it starts from, I want to have a business that does X, Y, Z, instead of thinking of it from the customer standpoint. And what's the problem that you're solving? What's the pain that you're alleviating? What's the opportunity that you're going to allow people to take advantage of? Because otherwise, a lot of businesses are kind of doomed to failure from the beginning when it's from the standpoint of, certainly from the passion and the interest and inspiration of the founder of the business, but also really has to be focused on solving a big problem if you want to be successful.
Yeah. And I know for a lot of folks that it can be, it can be tough because when someone starts a business, it's almost like their child, right? And nobody wants to hear that their child's ugly.
That's right. Right.
How do you approach someone that might be emotionally connected, or how can we, I guess, resist that urge to be emotionally connected to a business venture that we would have started and maybe step back, leave the trees, look at the forest and really see what we're working with?
Right. Well, again, if what I found is that if it's a constant struggle to for people to see the value in what you do, or sometimes it's because it's difficult to explain the value. Often for founders, it's self-evident for them that what they do has value, but it may not in the eye of their customer or potential customer. So, I really advise entrepreneurs, whether they're well into their businesses or whether they're just starting, to look at it from the standpoint of, what problem can I solve? And for what specific type of individual can I solve this problem?
Yeah.
I love this example. I've used it before, but there was a guy I read about. In fact, I tried to interview him and I've never connected with him. He was a former policeman in the Miami area, Dade County area. And he retired from being a policeman. He had a pension and some savings. And somebody told him he should put his money into bounce houses, the kinds that are at children's birthday parties, the inflatable ones. He'd never been in business. And so he just bought bounce houses. He bought, like, I think 3 or 4 bounce houses. And he figured that how hard could it be? It would take care of itself. People would throw money to play with his bounce houses. But he discovered, of course, that it was much more difficult than that. And he started calling around, trying to ask other bounce house owners, what do I do? They're burning a hole in my pocket, these bounce houses. What do I do? And, he didn't really have an end in mind when he started. Someone just told him, this is a good way to make money. Anyway, what ended up happening was, because no one could really answer his questions very well, he started solving his own problems. And today he's I like to call him the bounce house whisperer. He's in the Miami area, but he's got an international following. And what he does is to teach courses to other bounce house owners who don't know what to do with their bounce houses, who aren't making any money. And he walks them through this course and this membership to basically solve that really big problem. So that's about as narrow a niche as I can imagine, right? Solving the problem for bounce house owners. And he stumbled into it. He didn't see it at first.
Yeah.
But that's a great example, I think, of how, if we can solve a problem, a very hard, painful problem, for a specific niche of people, you can do very, very well.
Yeah. And I think some of the best ideas of inspiration come from some of our own problems. And it's kind of doing the research and the market research to make sure that we're not the only ones having this problem, that it's a big enough problem for enough people that we can actually solve it. And I want to actually use that perfect transition into a lot of topics that we're going to be talking about today, mainly focusing on burnout and whether someone's getting their business off the ground, or, as I mentioned, I know a lot of our listeners have a side hustle, right? Which means they have a main gig, a job where their earned income pays the bills, but they're trying to get something off the ground. Yeah. And that could be kind of strenuous. So I kind of want to get a better understanding on what exactly is burnout and what causes that in folks.
Sure. So burnout is a technical term, actually. I mean, it's something that we use in common conversation, but it's a technical term that was developed originally by a psychologist in the 70s to describe a specific set of symptoms that happen to people in the workplace, and now it's been generalized to all aspects of life. Sometimes the term is overused, but the technical definition of it has been defined by the World Health Organization as a bona fide disorder. And there are basically 3 sets of symptoms. The first is a pervasive exhaustion, both physically and psychologically, emotionally, that doesn't go away. So you go to bed and you sleep for 8 hours or whatever, and you wake up the next day and you're still exhausted. So there's this, and I should add, a staggering percentage of the American people are feeling this right now, and probably people worldwide with COVID. So the Gallup people happen to be located in Omaha, Nebraska. The Gallup survey people have done a survey on burnout for the last several years, going back at least, I think, 15 years, maybe longer. And the rate of people who report that they are always burned out has hovered in the low 20s for many years.
Wow.
Starting at about 2008. So that's pretty high, right? I mean, that's not something to be cheerful about, I guess, but that's where it's been for a long time. And so at any point in time, 20-something% of American workforce report that they are always burned out. But recently, and I think it was September, Gallup updated the results, and the number was 62% report that they are always burned out. And, we're in extraordinary times, of course, as everybody says, unprecedented times. But As a result, the rate of burnout is 3 times higher than it's been since the measurement has been kept. And it's of great concern. There should be a great concern to all of us, both personally and also for our teams.
Yeah.
If we have employees. Anyway, the first symptom is exhaustion. The second one is a disconnection from other people, psychological disconnection, to feel less and less and less connected or a part of a community. And clearly, COVID and the isolation of it, the quarantine, literally of it, has added to that. And so people are feeling, literally less connected with their coworkers, less connected with their customers, from their business partners, et cetera. And then the final, most serious stage of burnout is going from a sort of a passive disconnection to an active negativism and cynicism about other people, actually blaming other people for the feelings that you're feeling and for the situation that you're in. And people, this is where people say, take this job, at least mentally, take this job and shove it. They may not quit the job, but their feeling is gone beyond disconnected into feeling actively negative towards coworkers, customers, business partners, investors, et cetera. And at its very worst extreme, burnout of this type results not only in depression and anxiety, substance abuse, a lot of cases now of spousal abuse and child abuse in the household, but also of suicidality and actually suicide attempts.
Wow.
So it's a very serious issue. And from a business standpoint, in addition to the human cost, which is, of course, where we should all be focused, but there's also a very, as you would imagine, a very serious business cost. To productivity, innovation, creativity, relationship building. When engagement, another factor that Gallup measures, when engagement by workers in what they're doing goes lower and lower with burnout, the quality of that work gets less and less, and everything begins to suffer.
Yeah.
So serious issue.
What's staggering to me is when you said, burnout, bona fide syndrome, just like depression, anxiety, right. And when you first said 20%, I'm thinking, okay, 1 in 5 people experiencing burnout, now to 60%. Of course, the current climate of where we find ourselves could contribute to those numbers.
Yes.
But just hearing that, the staggering impact of that and the things that happen in someone's life with exhaustion and burnout and the disconnection and whatnot, could be a lot of situations where folks might think they're depressed. They might think they have anxiety, where it might actually be the burnout that's kind of leading into that. How can someone, I guess, prevent burnout, or if they're kind of wanting to, if they're already here, if they're already part of that 60%, how can we recover and turn this train around?
Exactly. And we've been Double Dare, my company, we spent a lot of time working on that. We've created a program called Extinguishing Burnout, and it basically addresses the 3 buckets of symptoms, and based on lots and lots of research, to suggest ways that people can in fact recover. There is a psychologist at UCal Berkeley who's pretty much regarded worldwide, I believe, as the guru or the authority on burnout. Her name is Christine Maslach. She's created an assessment or an inventory called the Maslach Burnout Inventory. And one really good place to start is to have some sort of assessment or evaluation to pinpoint the issues that are happening. On my website at doubledareyou.us, we have a simplified inventory based on Maslach, but much simpler and without the statistical and research-based data. Mm-hmm. But the idea is to help people pinpoint the symptoms that they're feeling, to really understand what's going on. That's, awareness is usually always the best starting place. And it is with burnout. So the first things that we look at, the first symptoms that most people have is the physical and psychological exhaustion. Those are the things that they notice. and they get really worried because they wake up the next morning and they wake up dead tired, and that's a very well, it's an unsustainable thing, right? Dr. Maslach refers to it um, as sprint as marathon, right?
Yeah.
Especially right now with so many companies cutting their teams and asking people to do two or three people's jobs. We're in this scenario of sprint as marathon, which is not sustainable.
Yeah.
Paradoxically, most of my clients and a lot of businesses nationally are reporting 2020 as being their best years ever. Now, clearly, it's been devastating to a lot of businesses, which is a tragedy. But for a lot of other companies, actually, this cutting of costs and increasing of productivity with everyone has resulted in a lot of cases in record sales and profits. The problem is that it's not sustainable from a human standpoint.
Yeah.
So first and foremost is this exhaustion piece. And if you can think about like an Olympic athlete, for example, who trains every day and creates micro tears in their muscles as they train, and they have to recover every day so that those micro tears can ultimately turn into new muscle, but not. But if you don't rely or don't include recovery in the process, the muscles will ultimately tear, and it'll have a negative effect. And it's like that with us as humans encountering burnout. We have this unrelenting stress as marathon, day after day after day after day, minute after minute after minute, is not sustainable. And so, what we have to do, one of the most evidence based strategies, is to practice micro recovery as an intentional daily practice. So, for example, you've probably heard of the Pomodoro method, where you work for 25 minutes and break for 5 minutes. There's another form where you work for 45 minutes on an hour and break for 15. And so you have these sort of mini sprints, but then you intentionally have a break. And in that break, walk away from your laptop or whatever. Walk out of your office, even if it's in a spare bedroom in your house, and intentionally detach from what you've been doing, and allow your mind and body to recover. A lot of my clients will go outside and walk around the block for that 5 minutes that they have. But or obviously meditation and mindfulness is one of the main things that we recommend. So to practice mindfulness techniques for 5 minutes or so, but to really detach yourself for with the Pomodoro method, 5 minutes every 30 minutes to disconnect. But that mini recovery is really essential, because again, this idea of sprint as marathon, unrelenting, overwhelming stress day after day, hour after hour, will result in burnout, number one. And if we don't interrupt that with breaks and mini recoveries, we can't get better. We simply can't.
And I could feel like that's a hard, that's a hard technique or a hard, I guess, strategy to sell to overachievers, high achievers,
Yes,
folks who are
it is.
very, very much ambitious and chasing goals, because, you almost have to translate to them. You increase productivity by doing less when
Yes.
for them, it might not compute. Have you found that to be a difficult sell in your business, and when you're working with entrepreneurs saying, hey, this is how you increase your productivity, do less?
Exactly. Oh, I know it. It is a hard sell. Um, Typically people have to have experienced the burnout themselves or in their teammates, and or have noticed, key predictive indicators that are decreasing. The client or customer satisfaction scores, for example, decreasing, customer service scores decreasing, sales decreasing. Ultimately, there are usually measurable, quantifiable um, uh, measurements of evidence that this isn't working out, which tends to get people's attention. Unfortunately, it seems that the best persuader is the day-to-day exhaustion or the depression, or the anxiety that ultimately get people's attention. I try to really evangelize about this a little bit to bring people's attention to it, because just to increase awareness, because this is not a sustainable strategy. But my experience, yes, you're quite right, and I have the same trouble sometimes.
Yeah.
When I'm on a roll, I don't want to stop.
I was gonna ask if you've experienced maybe in your own life. I mean, I can almost hear there's a connection to this, whether it be through seeing it in your clients or maybe experiencing it in yourself. Have you seen that burnout yourself? And if you don't
Yeah,
mind me asking, of course, and
no,
have you
no.
seen these strategies of the Pomodoro technique and stepping away? How is that in terms of changing the trajectory of your businesses?
Well, I'm sort of late to this discovery. I've got a master's in clinical counseling. I am a licensed therapist, and I certainly began to discover it in that study. But I went through a phase in my life when I owned a advertising agency with partners and reached a point of burnout myself. That looking back with 2020 vision, what I should have done was I should have left to do something else, which I ultimately did. But I should have done it probably 5 years sooner than I did. And I had great partners, a great company, great clients. All of that was fine, but I was personally burned out. And part of it was, as an entrepreneur, we're great starters and but not always great finishers.
Yeah.
And so, sadly, the truth about me as an entrepreneur is that I'm more excited starting things, particularly starting things with my clients today. And But after any considerable period, I'll like most entrepreneurs, begin to look at the next shiny thing. Anyway, I should have left the advertising agency that I started 5 years earlier than I did, and caused problems for myself and others by not really seeing what I was doing and what was happening.
Mhm.
In retrospect, I would have handled the situation a lot differently. And today, really try to practice what I preach. And Pomodoro method is a great technique. Um, you know, uh, Getting up away from your desk, practicing mindfulness techniques as a way of life, really, as well as a way of work, um, have all really helped me. I wish I knew what I know now. I
Yeah.
wish I'd known it 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I know one of, I guess I'd say the symptoms of possibly starting to feel the burnout is if you're starting your company and, maybe when you're working with the advertising agency and you're starting to get some of these, I don't want to say restrictions, but some of this traction around you. I
Yes.
think a lot of people will feel it as traction. They start to feel a symptom of, and I know myself, I'm guilty of this, feeling that imposter syndrome, right? Like maybe this isn't for me. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe I'm not cut out for this. Yeah, how
Yeah.
does that feed into burnout, and how can someone kind of overcome that imposter syndrome and maybe get out of their own head?
Yeah. Well, the thing about imposter syndrome, and we do a lot of work around that area, is that so entrepreneurs are always a little bit over their skis. They're always a little bit ahead of their own curve. They're visioning things that don't exist, and they are yet, uh, you know, they're very much creating future. And so. Um, and a lot of it is discovery on the fly, is discovery in real time. And it's one of the most exciting things I think about being an entrepreneur and being in that zone. But by the same token, there's an inherent and I think healthy doubt about, is this all bullshit, or do I know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Is this going to prove out or not? And of course, the reality is, not everything does prove out, and hopefully we can hit our batting average and do better than the average person. But we kind of know that in a lot of ways we're inventing this stuff in real time. So that that there's that element of doubt, I think, that comes up for all entrepreneurs, because they're not exactly sure where this is going to end. They feel good about it. Hopefully they've done some research about customer needs and wants and all the rest of it. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that after a while, I've got a client I'm working with right now who's so much like this, very, very skilled financial advisor person. and has been doing it for a long time. He's got a tremendous business and is making a lot of money. But in the back, for him now, having done this for a while, a long time, this all comes very, very easy to him. And he feels kind of guilty that if it's this easy, we sort of forget we live in an echo chamber, and we forget that what's easy for me took, 15 or 20 years to learn how to do.
Yeah.
And that other people could not do this at all, much less do it easily. But there's this sort of voice in the back of our heads that says, I'm putting something over on people. I'm charging a lot of money. I'm making a lot of money. I'm making them a lot of money, but this is easy for me. So, maybe I'm just a complete scammer, or and so on. But it really comes from mastery versus from being a fake or a fraud or an imposter.
That is the first time I've heard that described that way, because if we think of something becoming easy to us, a lot of times it's easy to kind of have that negative connotation of, maybe I am pulling something over someone. Mastery, in its sense, I think that gives the power to that person, in terms of if you reach a level of mastery, the next step is teach, and
Yes.
you can kind of get a little bit more comfortable with where you are when you're actively teaching. Kind of going back to
Yeah.
the example with the Florida man who had all these inflatable bounce houses. He
Yes.
solved his own problems enough to the point where he might have gotten to the level of mastery where it's easy to
Yeah.
make money, but now he's moving forward and teaching others how to do so. So I love that comparison, and I really hope that empowers some of the listeners to look at their situation a little differently and understand the mastery that they're in, and then maybe give back to their community by teaching others how to do what they do. What's one thing, because I want to make this actionable for some of our listeners right
Sure.
now, that they're listening and they might think to themselves, I might start feeling some of these symptoms of burnout. I'm probably at
Yes.
the level of exhaustion. I mean, hey,
Yeah.
it's safe to say about 60% of our listeners might be at that level, right?
Right.
What's one thing they can do today, maybe right after this podcast episode, that can maybe start to take them back down the right path?
Well, a couple of things, and you can get all of this at my website as a starting place. First of all, there's a burnout assessment that I would ask people to take, because it really pinpoints the specific issues that you're having, and then it suggests some things that you can do about it. There's three things at our website that I think would be a great start. One of them is this assessment. It takes maybe 10 minutes, and you'll get the results back immediately online, and it'll kind of pinpoint the things that you're having trouble with. Secondly, we have a 10-point checklist for burnout, health, and recovery that I would like to send everybody, which does a really good job, again, of talking about concrete things that you can do to feel better. One of these we've talked about, this idea of taking breaks and having mini recoveries throughout the day. One of the main principles of mindfulness is to stay in the present moment, to put all of your attention and care and concern into the thing that you're doing right here and right now. What tends to overwhelm people is to spend too much time in the future,
Hmm.
and particularly if we foresee this sort of never-ending list of things to do, that we can overwhelm ourselves by spending too much time in the future. So to spend as much time as we can in the present moment, putting all of our attention and care into the thing that we're doing, basic mindfulness is something that'll really, really help. Lose yourself in doing a job you have to do right now and put everything you've got into it,
Wow.
and you'll almost immediately feel some relief. Um, and also getting outside, and this is why the Pomodoro method is so good. Take 5 minutes every 30 minutes, or 15 minutes every hour, and take some kind of a break. If you can get your heart rate up, and just a brisk walk around the block, you're going to feel significantly better. This, as you say, it's tough to convince achievement-oriented people that they can afford to do this, but they really can't afford not to do it.
Yeah. And I think that's amazing what you said too, is kind of like losing yourself in the action that you're doing. I really hope our listeners kind of took that to heart. And definitely I'll be sure to have the link of that burnout assessment in the show notes so they can take that as well. Scott, I do want to make sure that our listeners have other ways to contact you through all your social media pages, your website, and things like that. What is the best way folks can contact you? What are the links that I can add to the show notes?
Well, LinkedIn is good. Most of my clients are in business, so search for me in LinkedIn. Um, Facebook also is good. The best probably is my website, which is doubledareyou.us, doubledareyou.us. And in fact, if you go to my site, there's a section called Extinguishing Burnout. There's a lot of free information there. And so, yeah, by all means, check it out. And um, there's actually more I can send you too. So,
Yeah.
but start there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be sure to have those links in the show notes. There's so much value in this episode. I feel like I could keep asking more and more questions on strategies and ways for us to overcome, but I do want to be respectful of your time. Scott, thank you so much for joining us and sharing some
My
of your
pleasure.
insights
Thank
today.
you. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to recap some of the key talking points that you mentioned throughout the episode for our listeners, as I like to do at the end. First, listening to feedback. Anybody out there working on a side hustle, on a business, if you're really trying to make it successful, maybe sell it, listen to the feedback of the market. Listen to those people around you, and maybe step away from the trees. Take a look at the forest. I know you don't want to hear your baby's ugly, but make sure that you're actually solving a problem, and a big enough problem at that. Again, if you're feeling exhaustion, if you're feeling disconnection, or maybe some negativity around the job that you're doing, those might be symptoms of burnout. It's something to pay close attention to. As Scott mentioned earlier, what used to be 20% of Americans experiencing burnout is now upwards of 60%. And you can imagine the climate that we're in with this pandemic, how many folks might be feeling that. You might be one of them. And ways to alleviate that: practicing mindfulness, taking breaks. I know that's hard for folks to kind of acknowledge, especially if you're focusing on achievement and acquiring some ambitious goals that you've set for yourself, but you need to take a step away. Pomodoro technique is a great technique. I do that myself, so I'm glad you mentioned that. And one thing that you mentioned that I loved when you said, lose yourself in what you're doing, you'll get a little bit of relief. Just stay present. I just read a book not too long ago. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza. He
Yes.
he has a book called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. He breaks it down saying anxiety is living in the future that hasn't happened yet. Depression is kind of thinking about a past that you can't change. Be
Yes.
present and make sure that you lose yourself in what you're doing and hopefully find some relief. And of course, be sure to follow the links in the show notes to get that burnout assessment. Scott, thank you once again for giving us the time today. To
My
the list,
pleasure. Thank you.
I want to say thank you for making it to the end of the episode. I hope you got value from this. Again, make sure to reach out to Scott if he can help you with your business. If you got value from this episode, I'd really appreciate if you gave us a rating, hit that like button, subscribe if you're following us and watching us on YouTube. Share it with a friend that you think might be able to benefit from this, or share this with your team. Any business owner out there, share it with your team to help make sure that they can alleviate any symptoms of burnout to help keep that productivity up. And as always, I want to remind you that we have a Patreon page where you can support us for as little as $1 a month and get some extra behind the scenes audio, some of our warm up audio with the guests. Scott has a great warm up there as well. And as we always say at the end of the episode, everybody wants the sunshine, but they don't want the rain. But you can't have the pleasure without a little pain. Let's grow. The No Rain, No Rainbows podcast is recorded at Camaraderie, a collective workspace in Greenville, South Carolina, right off the Swamp Rabbit Trail. If you're looking for a place to grow your business, network with other professionals, and establish your own workspace, Camaraderie is the place to do so.